Good evening, good evening. Let me just, as always, take a moment to make sure that YouTube confirms that we are live. And just loading up. Yes, we are live. Excellent. Good evening, everybody. And welcome to episode 7, live stream number 7 of porting Gitflow to Golang live. And tonight, the planned work is building the workspace abstraction that we discussed last week on last week's excellent live stream. So, first of all, as always, welcome from Wales. Live stream number 7. Welcome from Wales. What news this week in Wales? Most of the country is now in what they're calling local lockdowns with COVID-19. It's only the most rural parts of Wales that are now free from these restrictions. So that's something that's going on. What other news? You may have seen reports about the UK government having problems with its spreadsheets and as a result losing many thousands of COVID tests. And if you've been following that, one of the things you might have been surprised at was the fact that they were using Excel at all. I want to assure you that Excel is not the problem here. You'd be amazed at how many large businesses rely on Excel a lot for their data. 6 months isn't a long time to build a brand new system, especially as all they've done is outsourced the work to other people. They've not actually built a team up to do this themselves. And it took them 6 months to get an app launched, the COVID tracking app. So the thing to remember here from an educational point of view, from an IT point of view, is many systems are not as bespoke as you might expect. There is a lot of manual carrying being done by these kind of tools. And when these systems break down, it's not always the tool's fault. You want to look at the people and how the people fail to prevent this problem and how they fail to ratify this problem in a timely manner. And you look at the consequences of that. So that's what's going on nationally. Yeah. I'm trying to think what other news, really. Life goes on, I guess. As always, if you're watching live, please do leave a comment. Please do leave a like. I want to know where you're from. Tell me about yourself. Tell me a bit of news from your part of the world. I'd love to hear it. If you're watching live, that'll appear in the live stream chat playback. If you're watching this on catch up, that will appear in the normal YouTube video comments afterwards. Please do leave a like, do subscribe, do leave a comment. Let me know where you're from. That'd be great. So, what are we about tonight? Well, if you've watched last week's live stream, we ended that on quite a high, I think is the right phrase to use. We sketched out a design, and in combination with the chat, we refined that design and came up with a solution that looked like it was worth tackling. It looked like it was worth implementing. It felt like a good starter. It would be interesting to see what we end up with and how much we deviate from that design. But it felt like we had our starting point there. So tonight's planned work is to actually start writing the Golang code to turn that design into reality. Create the workspace structure. A structure is a Golang. It's not quite the same as an object, but it's their alternative to an object for organizing code. We then want to look at the list of interfaces that describe the behavior of these workspaces, as we're expecting to have quite a few, especially as longer term the behavior of the workspaces will vary depending on who the hosting provider is. And the other thing we wanted to do tonight was to identify the operations that need to go into our Git abstraction layer. Last week we made a list of all the all the Git operations that are in the existing shell script code, the existing Gitflow extension. And I was having a hard time deciding which side of our glass wall between workspaces and Git some of those operations were going to lie on. So I'm hoping that tonight we would be able to build that out and start to figure out where things go. Unfortunately, since these plans were made and the live stream announced, there has been a change. And as a result, we're going to have to delay this work probably until next week now. See, on the 1st of October, GitHub made a change. Now, don't worry if you've not heard about this change. I haven't seen any emails out to anyone who is a billing contact for an organization, or anyone who has their own account on there. I've seen nothing from GitHub about this. And as we'll see in a moment when we go onto GitHub's blog, this article is really hard to find. But what have GitHub done? GitHub have changed their behavior. When you create a repo on GitHub, traditionally it would be called master. From the 1st of October, it is now called main. And there was no real warning about this. I say GitHub's not done anything, not been in contact with anyone about this. The change is done. It doesn't matter whether we support it or not. That's irrelevant. The change has been made and we need to adapt to it. So as a result, instead of building the workspace abstraction tonight, we're going to have to change our plans. He says, trying to get the presentation to scroll. What we've got to do is deal with an outside interruption. And I've said this is part 1 because in reality, in a normal day job, this happens quite a bit. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a moment. So tonight, what we're going to do, we're going to go through what GitHub's changed and make sure we understand it. Make sure I understand it. That's for starters. Then I'm going to look and understand whether or not it causes the existing Gitflow extension to break. Is this going to cause us problems? Because if it is, we need to make a new release of the existing Gitflow extension to cope with this. We're going to have to figure out what we're going to do. We're going to have to make that change. Might not actually release it tonight, but we'll definitely need to get the change done ready. So, let me switch cameras. Okay. One of the reasons I'm live streaming this work is because I want to use it as an educational platform. I want to give people an insight of what it can be like to be a professional developer. And the outside world changing your development plans is a big part of that. No two ways about it. We live in an interconnected world. This idea that you can have these little islands, I'm trying to think of a better phrase for that. I want to say ivory towers, but that has different connotations. But the idea that you can create world almost in isolation, you can work almost in isolation of the world around us is just not true. It's not reality for most of us. Most of us are working on systems that are interconnected. Most of us are delivering into systems that are interconnected. And nearly all of us today use tools that we don't write, we don't host, we don't maintain. And as a result, other people's roadmaps, other people's timelines, other people's actions will impact on what you want to do when you want to do it. And this is an example of that. And when it happens, first of all, you need to know that it's happened. We're in a fortunate position here that this isn't a commercial product with paying users. I don't have any emails actually, but I certainly don't have angry emails from paying customers coming to me and saying, why has XYZ stopped working? I've not had any of that at all. In fact, I'm just going to check. You can't see this browser at the minute, but I'm just going to check this. Bear with me. GitHub's notification system is so rubbish. I'm signed out of GitHub at the minute. Right. Just let me go through this. Two-factor authentication. Just bear with me. And bear with me while the codes go from red to blue. Alright. Is it going to let me in? It has let me in. Excellent. Right. So I'm on the browser that you can't see for the minute. I'm just checking GitHub to see whether there's any notifications. And there aren't. There are none at all. So if this is causing problems for anybody, no one has said anything to us. That's worth knowing. But in the real world, when these kind of things happen, you'll find out because it's caused disruption. Maybe someone on your development team, if you're a team leader or a development manager or an engineering manager, that kind of thing, will suddenly report the fact that their productivity has been hit. They can't get a job done. They're blocked because a tool stopped working. Or they need some help to understand how to use the tool now that it's changed. That's another common thing. Unfortunately, more likely is you'll have customers going, why has something broken? And you weren't aware that it was broken until the customers tell you. So we're actually in a very fortunate position here. But I still think it's important we look at this, we understand it, and if there's any action needed, we deal with that tonight and get it done and out of the way. So that's what we're going to do tonight. Back to the slides for a moment. Oh, there we go. So the other thing about the real world, the outside world as it were, intervening, is I have an early start tomorrow morning. I've got to do some interviewing tomorrow morning. My first interview is scheduled at 8 AM. So as a result, I won't be able to live stream for quite as long tonight. So I'm probably going to keep this down to an hour to an hour and a half. So once we've gone through the Gitflow extension and the changes that GitHub's forced on us, we'll probably call it a night there, and then we can start the workspace work. The work that was originally scheduled for tonight, we can start that afresh next week. Alright, so that's the plan for tonight. As always, let's get coding. Over to Linux Cam. There we go. And hopefully you can see my terminal on the video stream. And something else I want to point out, it's a bit silly, but I've done it anyway. There, right. The background, I've changed the colour for tonight, since we're actually dealing with an outside interruption. I've gone for red. We'll be back to our more soothing blue next week, is the plan. So what's going on? Right. So, as I mentioned earlier, don't be surprised if you're not aware of this change. What we've got here is GitHub's own blog, https github.blog. There is nothing on the front page telling us about this change. Absolutely nothing. Now, I don't visit this blog very often, so when I first visited, I scrolled down and I thought, ooh, all posts. That will have the blog article I'm looking for. That's what I want. So here's all posts. October the 5th, some changes. October the 4th, some changes. October the 1st, some changes to GitHub Actions. And then we're on to September the 30th, saying that the OpenJDK project had started hosting with them. So where's our post for the 1st of October? Why is this change not in the all posts section? How are you supposed to keep on top of this if GitHub themselves aren't advertising this change? They are making it hard for us. They're really making it hard for us. Now, to find the blog article, we need to open the menu, and there's a category here called changelog. And the post we're looking for is actually buried in here. And what we can see, excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold, so it's triggering a bit of a cough tonight. So what we can see is actually GitHub have got quite a few articles that they're not actually sharing with everybody, and they're not actually putting in the all posts section, which is that's their choice, but it's something to be aware of. So how did I find out about this? Twitter is the answer. I follow thousands of people on Twitter for various reasons, but amongst those, and some of the oldest accounts or some of the accounts I've been following the longest rather, are other people in tech. And I rely on that to help surprises be surfaced. Because a change like this, it affects many people. And I found out about it when Alex Ellis of OpenFaz fame, he shared a tweet that he had seen saying, be aware this has happened. And if I wasn't following all these people on Twitter, I probably wouldn't know about it. As we've just seen, we can't find it by looking at GitHub's own website unless you know exactly where to look. So, again, back to the educational aspect of this live stream. If you're someone who is watching this because you're interested in a career in software development, or you're interested in improving or advancing your career, this is an example of where networking helps. These connections from you to other people, so that information can sort of flow to you in a way, because you can't go and get everything anymore. In the old days of things like Google Reader, it was a lot easier to do, but now it's so much harder to keep on top of information and get access to it all in one place. And so we rely on people to tell us about that. So yeah, so networking, very important. So what has changed? I mean, the headline says it all. The default branch for newly created repositories is now called a main. It used to be called master. This live stream is not the place to debate whether the name change in principle is a good idea or not. We're here to discuss and deal with the fallout of GitHub having made the change the way they have. Okay? So, and this is just the default branch, which is a term we need to explore in more detail in a moment. Now, one thing it's saying is existing repositories are not impacted by this change. This change only affects new repositories. And with that in mind, I've actually gone and created a new repository just for tonight. See, on my Linux machine, I'm logged in as a different user to the user I normally work as. And this user doesn't get to sign into many things. So I've had to set this up in advance tonight. And here we go. GitHub main test, I've called this repository. It's temporary. I'll be deleting it once we've finished our testing. But what you can see here is where in the past you would have a branch called master, we now have a branch called main instead. That's what's happened. And that gets done for us when we create the repository. And I don't think it asks us. I'm trying to remember when I went through the screens to create this about an hour ago. I don't remembering, or 35 minutes ago in fact, I don't remember it asking me to pick the name of the default branch. It just done it for me. As an aside, while I remember, this is actually an opportunity for us, because with Gitflow, the default branch is actually develop. It's not actually master. We keep master, the historical name master, to be our production branch, but on GitHub and Bitbucket and anywhere else where you're hosting it, we go in and change the default branch to develop. Because when someone clones your repo, when someone joins your team and they download they use git clone for the first time to download the code locally so they can work, what gets downloaded is the default branch. So what this means with these changes GitHub have made, because one of the things you can do is we can actually just set a different default. You've got to be able to go into your organization. You've got to have permission to do this. But on a per organization basis, or for yourself, for your own user repos, per user repos, you can actually set this now so that develop, which is what we want anyway, becomes the default branch going forward. So this is a change that we can take advantage of when we get back to the Golang code, and we can do something with that. But for tonight, we've got an interesting situation. And before we go any further, I've just noticed here that GitHub have a repository called GitHub/renaming. So something else that's not on the blog. So GitHub's communication on this is definitely problematic. So yeah. So instead of them putting a blog post out or putting some documentation somewhere, they've actually stuck a README in a repo. So this is them linking what they've changed. And there's some other things in here that don't affect us that are interesting to me personally. I'm just scrolling through. Right. Okay. So it doesn't, there's nothing, just reading through that, my main takeaway of it is when a new repository is created, which is important to us because we deal with those when we do a Gitflow init, which we'll look at in a moment. So one of my takeaways from this is that's all that's changed. And what we need to do now is we need to understand the consequences of it. And to do that, let's jump into some code. So here's our code from last week. But we're going to go away. And interesting that our Golang route keeps changing. That's something I need to sort out. It really shouldn't. Let's jump into the init code. Let me minimize that. This is the function that's going to be impacted the most. You see, what we do, I will demonstrate this from the terminal. So this is what someone would do when they join your organization. And we called it Gitflow main test. Oh, I am tired. I am sorry. It's been a long day. There we go. Could not read from remote repository. What's going on there? Give me a moment. So, sorry, I'm just noticing the red on my little viewing monitor. That looks quite nice, actually. Right then. So because I've rebooted the laptop since last time, my SSH key has not been picked up. So I just need to add that in. There we go. Right. So, yes, there we go. No, still not working. Why is that not working? Huh. Right. The joys of demo accounts. Why can I not read from there? So I'm getting the message, repository not found, because I can't type. So what is that repository called? Github main test. See, tired. I'm making silly mistakes. Right then, back to Linux Cam. Github main test. There we go. That's better. So that's what someone would do. We would do a git clone, and we'd use the SSH for Git over SSH protocol. And then what we would do is we'd go into this. First of all, you can see here are highlighted in green. Our new branch is called main, so that's what's been pulled out. We would normally do a git hf init at this point. And one of the things we saw when we went through the code last week was this will actually push changes back up. So I'm going to run this and I'm going to see what happens. And it's in automatic mode, which means it's not going to prompt me interactively and ask me anything. It's just going to run and we'll see what it does. Huh. Well, that's nice and sensible. I'm a bit surprised in a good way. So what's happened? Let me highlight this whole section. I wasn't expecting this. I'm delighted by it, I have to say. Absolutely delighted by it. The existing code has already detected that the default branch is called main. So instead of it having master hard coded, it's actually looked at what branch we're on. Has decided that's what we're going to use for tracking production releases, which is absolutely fine. And then it's added develop as a new branch. That's what this is. Excuse me. That's what's happening down here. Let me highlight this. It's gone and pushed develop branch up to GitHub. And we can see that if we go back to here, so this is the browser, and we reload, we should now have two branches, and indeed we do. So we've got main and we've got develop as our two branches. And then we can click through here to our branch view, and we can see that at the minute they're identical, which is why it says updated 44 minutes ago. That was when I first created the repository. So that's really good news. And certainly not what I was expecting, that's for sure. So we've ended up with Gitflow doing the right thing. Sorry, the Gitflow extension. It's done the right thing first time. Is that all we need to do? I'm going to tell you no, it's not. And how am I going to justify that? Well, what we're going to do, I'm just rearranging my Mac so I can see what's going on the camera. There we go. Right. What we're going to do is we're going to do a code review. You see, what's happened is it looks like the code has worked and done exactly what we want. We've got the outcomes we want, and it looks like we don't need to make any code changes in order to in order for people to be able to use it. That's what it looks like. But what I want to do now is pull the code apart and understand why there's no changes needed, just in case there's actually a surprise or two in there. I think that's very important. Just because it looks like it's working doesn't mean it has worked. So that's what I'm going to do next. So where I am, if you've been following the series, you'll be familiar with the fact that I've got a project checked out of Git called Gitflow. It's a mixture of the old code, the shell extension that everyone uses in production at the minute, and slowly but surely we're growing the new Gitflow Golang code as well. Slowly but surely. But we are in the develop branch. In fact, let me add some extensions. We'll stick git lens in, I'll stick git graph in, and there is a GitHub extension as well. One of the reasons I've come to really like VS Code is just the sheer volume of extensions available for most situations. So we'll grab this one as well. So that's 3 extensions installed now. So hopefully I can actually show you a few more things in here. That's live share. So let's see what Git lens says is going on. Now hopefully you can see this on the left hand side. Hopefully the font's big enough for whatever screen you're viewing on. We've got file history, we've got line history of the file we've got open, which is really cool. And we've got the repository history as well. So right now we are actually on the develop branch. And we can see that down here in the bottom left hand corner. Again, coming back to the educational aspect, it isn't important whether you use a command line or you use tools in the IDE. I would encourage you to learn the command line tools as well, because they can give you a more first principles understanding of what Git is and how it's working. But at the end of the day, we're all hired to be productive. We're all hired to write the correct code, the code that our organizations need, and to ship it and make sure it sticks. So we're not constantly having to go back and fix it over and over. That's what we're all hired to do. And we work far faster these days than we did when I first joined the industry, that's for sure. So if in order to be productive, you need graphical tools like this. I'm pointing at the screen with my, that side. I'm pointing at the screen with my pen. I've been doing that a lot today on video calls, I'm sorry. If you need to use a graphical tool in order to be productive, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Do what works for you. You're going to see me use the command line a lot, partly because I've been using the command line longer than these tools have existed, so I'm more comfortable with it, and partly because I can do things faster with it, because I know what I'm doing there. Whereas with the tools, because I use these a lot less, I'm a bit slower with them and I'm not always sure of their capabilities. So that's why you'll see me use the command line tool. Plus I'm old. I've been doing this since, Christ, I've been running source control systems since 1994. So that's 26 years. I'm in my 27th year, depending on how you count it, 26th, 27th, of running source control systems. I've actually built a source control system for an organization in the past. In the time before Git, all source control systems were a bit of a compromise. So yeah, I've been doing this a long time, and some things are a bit set in my ways. When you get to my age, you'll probably be the same, if you're not there yet already. So, what are we doing tonight? This code review. So what I want to do is I want to understand why the code works, why we didn't have to make any changes. That's what I want to do. So the first thing to do is to understand where it gets the production branch from. And if you watched the code, if you watched this last week, you'll have seen that came up when we were doing the Git operations, I'm sure. So what's going on here? Let me walk you through this code. And this is also kind of a tutorial for shell script programming as well while I'm at it. So what we're looking at here, This first line isn't a comment. That hash pling, that hash mark and exclamation mark, which is known as hash pling here in the UK, for those of us who learned to program on BBC Micros and Acorn Archimedes, those were the days. Question marks were known as pling, so it's hash pling. This is not a comment. Those 2 bytes are used by the operating system, Linux, to go, ooh, we've got a script, and it's going to tell us how to run it. And the correct term for that is called a shebang. S-H-E-B-A-N-G. Shebang. I don't know the origin of that one. And we are saying we want to run this script to run using the bash shell, but we're not going to tell you where the bash shell is installed. We want you to find it from the user's environment. This is a way to write portable scripts. In the old days, when bash was an optional extra on Unix systems, so before Linux was the only Unix system most people have ever used, bash was something people had to install, and most of us didn't have super user or root access on the computers we were working on. So we would install our favorite shells under our own user accounts, and then we would add it to our path. So this convention of saying user bin env is a Linux, well, it's a Unix program that will actually search the environment for where our shell is. So this whole shebang line here is a convention for writing portable shell scripts, and especially if you're working on Macs, where macOS ships with a version of bash that is positively ancient, still version 3, whereas I believe we're now using version 5 on Ubuntu, and have been for some time, if memory serves. So if that said, because the way a lot of people will write this, they'll do that. They'll change it to be shebang hash bin / bash, and that'll work if you're on a Unix system. But on an OS X system, on a macOS system, on a MacBook Pro, or an iMac, or an Apple device, that may pick up a version of bash that the user doesn't want to use because it's old and decrepit. It's outdated. So user bin env bash is the way to do this. Then we've got some functions, and in bash we just for writing portable shell scripts, because bash isn't the only interpreter that can read these style of shell scripts. There's a whole family of them that started off with what's called the Bourne shell, which is /bin/sh. Then you had the corn shell, which gives us most of the syntax we use in bash scripts these days. The corn shell, if memory serves, was proprietary to AT&T. So people like Sun would have licensed it for their systems. But if you were hacking around on predominantly BSD systems from Berkeley Labs, you may not have had a genuine corn shell. And that arose to all sorts of clones of the corn shell, other people implementing the same shell, but from their own source code. And bash is the one that won. So bash's syntax and the POSIX shell syntax is largely corn shell programming. And do I still have it on my... I do. Let me grab this off my... So, here on my bookshelf, it's one of the oldest books I own. Hopefully you can see that. So this is a corn shell programming book by O'Reilly, by a gentleman called Bill Rosenblatt. And this edition is dated can you see that? It's dated March 1994. So this is a book I would have bought either during my last year at university or for my first job. Can't tell you which, it's too long ago, I can't remember. Let me put this back on my bookshelf. not my bookshelf. Everything's falling on my bookshelf. If you hear a loud crash in a bit, that's my bookshelf. All the books on my bookshelf falling over from having pulled that off the shelf. Yeah. So Corn Shell. If you want to learn Unix shell script programming, get a Corn Shell book. I assume O'Reilly still make one. I don't know. So that's the syntax we're looking at here, is largely Corn Shell programming. So we've got some helper functions, and then we've got our default command, and I'll show you how that's called before we actually go through it. I'm going to scroll past all of this, and you'll see here there's no actual call to command default. There's nothing here at all for it, which is interesting, because it means this shebang at the top is absolutely worthless in practice. Oh, I'm sorry. Back to Linux Cam. Sorry about that. That's me being silly. Right. Anyway, I was actually scrolling past everything to come down to the bottom of the file to show you there's another function here called command help. And then above that, sorry for the fast scrolling, I know it's not nice viewing. We've got a function called command default. We've got some helper functions. Come on, camera, stop playing up. And that's it. So this file is actually loaded into another shell script in order to execute it, which means that this shebang here in practice is absolutely useless. Doesn't do anything. So that's worth knowing. But our default command's what we're interested in tonight. So what is it doing? Let me make that full screen. There we go. That's a bit better. So everything fits on the screen. I'm doing all these hand gestures. You can't see them. I need to get a wider angled lens and a better camera position so I can gesticulate madly, I think. Anyone who's seen me talk knows I do a lot of hand movement. So the first thing it's doing is parsing the command line to understand what options, what flags we've passed in on the command line. There's two flags, a force and an ask flag. Then it tries to work out if we're actually in a Git repository, and if we're not, it actually runs git init. I will probably change that in the future, so it will probably say fatal, not a Git repository or something, I think. If we are in a Git repository, there's some checks to make sure we're in a Git repository we're happy to work in. We covered the code for those last week. And then it works out if the repo has already been initialized, there's no need to do anything else. And I don't know if you can read this, it's in quite faint text. One of the Git extensions I installed is actually doing a real live Git blame. And it's dark grey on very dark grey, so contrast wise and accessibility wise this might be quite hard to read, but I can move my mouse over these comments, and make them pop up. And in real time I can understand the latest change to that line of a file. So that's quite a handy tool to have. Unless it's something embarrassing. And I put my mouse over a piece of code that I wish I hadn't written. And there's going to be some of those, there always are. So what happens next? What's the code doing? So what we're doing here is we're working out where the remote is, what origin is pointing at. And as we've covered several times during the live streams, is the concept that origin is where is our upstream is pretty much hard coded into the Gitflow extension. And for now it's something we're not going to be tackling. Certainly not tonight anyway. yeah, so it's looking for origin. If there's only one remote, so it looks like it will cope with that, but I wouldn't bet on it, not without testing it. And then this is interesting. This is the reason I'm doing this code review. So what we're doing here is we're saying, right, if we got a master branch, and is the force flag in use? Because according to the comment, this code's going to attempt to create a branch called master if it doesn't already exist. So that's a test case, a test scenario that I want to reproduce. Because I want to make sure running this multiple times doesn't cause problems. So what are these comments telling us? And Vincent needs to take credit for these comments. I know Matt on the live stream last week was being very kind to me and pointing out just how well commented the code is, in his opinion. Hello Matt, if you get to watch this. It was great having you on the live stream last week, mate. But I just want to point out, I'm not the only person who's written comments for this. This Git plugin is allowing me to show that Vincent, the original author of the code, 11 years ago, February the 20th, 2010, actually wrote some of these comments. We'll probably find he wrote quite a lot of them, in fact. So you may have heard the phrase standing on the shoulders of giants, as it were. I cannot sit here and take credit for the Gitflow extension. I'm the current maintainer. Sure. I don't know if Vincent maintains his original code anymore or not. He wasn't when I forked this 7 years ago. But I didn't build this from scratch. Vincent set the pattern. And those of us who come afterwards, for lack of a better phrase, we hold it in trust. It's not ours to do things to, as it were. We're almost like a trustee, a guardian of it. And our job is to try and keep it up to date and move it forward so we leave it in a better state than it was when we got it for the next generation. That's the idea, that's the thinking behind the approach. Getting a bit philosophical tonight. Let's go back to some code. So what I want to do is I want to understand the circumstances where it may actually try to create a master branch. So if the repo has no branches at all, and I need to understand how that's possible, it will go and potentially, it's got this if statement here. So that's something to understand. Something else, what's interesting is when I ran the demonstration earlier on the live stream, is we came into this if branch. We came into the else statement because it asked us which branch should be used for tracking production releases, and we can see that by going back to our terminal. We can see that this is the text that was on the screen. That tells us which branch of the code we came through. That's why it's important to exercise code and keep a copy of the output or the logs, or both if you've got them, so that we've got something we can actually compare against as we're going through the code to help us get our bearings. This is software archaeology 101, if you like. At Gambaro Digital, I've given myself the job title of Chief Software Archaeologist. If I ever had any business cards made, I don't think I've ever had any made, but if I did, that would be the job title I would do on there, because it really sums up my approach to software engineering. Is archaeology, taking things apart, decomposition to understand what's going on and why. So in this else branch, we've got these, we've actually got some repeated code, which is interesting. So we look for, in order, we look for whatever's already in the config, I'll show you that in a minute, for the master branch. Then we look for a branch called production. Then we look for a branch called main. And then we look for a branch called master last. It's like the fourth name that we try. And once again, I just want to highlight, this isn't me. 11 years ago, on the 23rd of March 2010, Vincent anticipated this, which is awesome. So 11 years ago, when most people would not have remotely thought that default branches would be called anything other than master, Vincent already added code to deal with this situation, which is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So that's why it didn't try to create a master branch for us, because it detected that the main branch already existed and it used that. So that's utterly awesome. But what we've got down here is a hard-coded default suggestion of master. And I added that. So I don't remember the exact circumstances of that code. My guess would be that circumstance where the default branch was already developed, checked out the code, and developers were doing a git hf and hf init so that they could actually work. And yeah, that must have been what happened. That should be pretty rare, because the reason I think it's rare is we check locally. If we haven't found a local branch, we check remotely. Who wrote this? I wrote this. I wrote some of it anyway. Yeah, that's all right. I was just wondering whether in my mind I was wondering whether this here needed to be repeated twice. It does, because we're checking origin for whether or not it exists. So that's fine. I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with this syntax here. Is that me? That's me. It's not why we're here, but as an aside, that should be in double brackets, not single. The double square brackets affords different protection to string expansion inside the clause, inside the if statement. These single square bracket and double square bracket are actually, on old systems, they're actually Unix commands. They're an alias for a command called test, which is how if statements were implemented back in the old days. And now I'm showing my age by saying I'm old enough to have programmed on Unix systems that work that way. So here we've got master as our last resort. So this is one of the reasons we're doing this code review, is to find these little things. One of the things we need to think about is whether master should remain the last resort at the minute. And I don't know the answer, I'll be honest. But I've got an idea about how to find an answer. So we're going to park that one and we're going to come back to it. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to start some notes so we remember what we're coming back to. So we want This is a bit about how you take meeting minutes. Similar idea. So we've got parked items. But I'm also going to make a list of things I need to come back to before the end. What is our ultimate fallback name for the master branch as was? Okay. That way I don't have to remind my memory. I can just come back and look at my notes. And after that, we've got a variable called master branch. Right now we're not going to be doing variable renaming. Longer term, as we get rid of this code, we will be the whole term master, we're going to remove that from the code base. But for today we're going to leave that alone, because when you're doing, this isn't quite a hot fix, but it's something that you can and probably should develop as a feature. But when you're doing work that's an interruption, it's unplanned work, and you're tackling the work in a way that you want to get back, so allow you to get back to your normal work, your scheduled work, as quickly as possible. You want as light a footprint as possible. So variable renaming in an IDE that doesn't support renaming things inside it, the language support for shell scripts in VS Code won't allow me to safely rename variables. I've got to do it by hand. That's risky. I could break something and end up shipping a bug along with a fix. So you tackle as minimal things as possible, and anything else, you park that, and you create, if you're using something like Jira, you create a ticket for that to act as a follow-up. It goes into your, I was going to say it goes into your backlog, but it goes into wherever you, backlog's the right phrase. It goes into your backlog for future planning. You don't change it here and now. Plenty of people will, and it's one of the marks of a junior developer, actually, is when they're going through things and changing them, they'll change more than they need to, because they're going, oh, well, I'm in here, I might as well do that. As you get more experience and you get your fingers burned a bit more, one of the things you learn to do is to touch as little as you have to. As much as you need to, but as little as you have to. And you set aside separate time to come back and tackle things in their own time, on their own. You give each task its own time, and some tasks it's not their time. And this is an example of that, where we don't want to go through and eliminate the master term at this point in time. So what are we doing with the code? We're repeating ourselves a bit by the looks of it, but what we're doing here is we're making sure the branch is created. And we're checking it out. No, Git branch will create the branch. We create the branch if it doesn't exist. Right. And then we store the config. The reason I'm hesitating is we've got this should check existence flag here, this variable. And if we're in a situation where we've hard coded the name master, which is why I'm interested in it, because there is no branch for us to get the name from, I've added a check to say skip that problem, skip all this code. And this is historical code. This isn't code I've added. In fact, I didn't do very much with this at all. So we check out the branch if it doesn't exist, and we set its backing branch at the same time. So what's going on here? If the branch doesn't exist, how does it get created? That's what I'm now interested in. And I'm zooming around a bit, bear with me. So we get in this situation where we don't have a branch with the name we're after. It doesn't exist, so we've not been able to find one that we are looking for. So we've got a hard-coded fallback. And then we don't seem to do anything with it. So what I'm now doing is I'm reviewing the code to see if there's any surprises further down. Okay. So if head doesn't exist, we set it and we give it the alias of the branch is going to be. So maybe that creates. I mess with head so rarely. Well, directly mess with head so rarely. Then we go through and we create the branch afterwards. Okay, so we've asked what developer master should be. And then we go through and create them. So that's where we're creating them. So that means this code will create a branch called master as a last resort. Okay, right. So our next question is, what should this default be? Now I understand the code. Now I've read the code to understand it. I think we want to see if we can change this line of code. It might not be possible. It might not be possible. But the default suggestion is hard-coded at the minute. And whenever I see a hard-coded string, my question always is, can I get that from somewhere? Instead of hard-coding it, is there something I can ask to get that value? And the obvious thing to ask is Git. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch to the browser. I'm going to do some searching. And the first thing we want to do is actually find, oh, yes, Google, I'm sure I agree to your terms. What we want to do is find the source code for Git. Or in this case, a mirror of it. And the reason I want that is I want its changelog. Now then, they don't maintain a changelog file by the looks of it. So what I'm doing, let me explain. So I've used Google to find out where I can read the source code for Git. And then what I'm looking for is to see, I'm looking through I'm using GitHub's UI, the website, to look through and see, do they maintain a list of all the changes that they've made? And yes, the changes will be in the Git log, but sometimes, excuse me, people maintain a high level description of what's changed and why, which can be really handy. And I know there was a documentation folder earlier on. I don't want to dump it. I don't want to look in there until I've gone through this top level, had a quick look. And again, apologies for the fast scrolling. I know it doesn't make good viewing. But all I'm doing is scanning for something that isn't something that's a a documentation file. If there's anything in the top folder, and the answer to that is no, there isn't. There's something ironic about Git, the source control system that runs the entire planet these days. Actually, its own CI is failing at the minute. There's something ironic about that. I should actually read this documentation. I haven't read this in years. I should actually read this at some point. Right, so let me dump through the documentation. Have we got a high level changes list in here? Release notes, there we go. Release notes, awesome. We have got many years of release notes. Now then. So there's lots of changes. Let's look at the history for the folder. That'll help us see. Okay. So this mirror, unfortunately, the Git log's a bit crap, in all honesty. That's not very helpful. The 7th batch. Nah, not helpful. So what I'm looking for are releases this year, really, more than anything else. Because what I'm wondering is, looks like they're preparing this at the minute. It looks like they're yeah, it looks like they're preparing a release. But what I'm after is to see whether or not Git can actually tell us what the default branch should be called. If there's a command that will tell us that. And my guess is, if there is, they may have added it in recent times. So I'm going to search this page for the phrase master, and there's nothing in there. So there's nothing coming up. What about in 228? And there are 2 matches in here. Right. So the name of this is what I'm after. So in 228, the name of the primary branch in existing repositories and the default name used for the first branch in newly created repositories is made configurable, so that we can eventually wean ourselves off the hard-coded term master. Now the question is, what is that configuration value? How do we find that? And do we have 228 locally? Let me just quickly check. No, we don't. So remember, if you've been watching all the live streams, one of the things I said is I wanted to isolate us from different versions of Git. It's one of the things I wanted to do. And this is an example of why. Here on Ubuntu, we're running an older version of Git, 225.1. And as soon as we've got the notes, we can actually see how old that is. 225.1. So 8 months ago. So, you know, while it's behind, it's not the end, it's not stupidly behind. On OS X, you can't see this machine, but I'm just going to quickly see what version of Git I've currently got on my my Mac. Come on, Catalina, stop being a pain. Right. Like I say, you can't see this screen. So on my Mac, Apple's Git is 2.8.4, which is probably patched to high hell, But 2.8.4 is years old. Absolutely years old. Which is pretty rubbish. But no doubt Apple have actually added a lot of features. They've backported a lot of features, no doubt. Although I'm someone who's quite skeptical of the effectiveness of backporting. But anyway, so we know in 2.28 there is the ability to change what the default branch is called. But we don't know the command for that, because these release notes don't seem to tell us. I'm just double checking. They don't seem to actually tell us how we use that new feature. So yeah, that's a bit of an oversight. So this is the point where we turn to Google. And I'm sure some of you would have done straight away rather than going to find the documentation first. Git config documentation. Well, it makes sense that if it's anywhere, it's going to be in here. But what I don't know is what version we're looking at. So it's possible this this documentation I'm looking at here isn't up to date. So what I'm looking for is there anything in here? Right, there isn't. Is there a version number on the bottom? It's possible this file's old and out of date, you see. Right. So another thing to search for is default. 409 matches. That's not going to work. Right. Aha, there we go. Found it. So there's a git config setting called init.defaultBranch. There we go. That's what we're after. Found it. Now I don't have Git 2.28, so I can't, at the minute, I can't write the code to make use of this because I can't see it run. So what are we going to do about that? Let me just move that out of the way. The obvious thing to do is see if we can build Git locally. So I'm going to pull the repository down and see if I can compile it. I haven't tried this before. This could be a very, very short experiment. I mean, it's something I need to be able to do long term anyway as part of the testing regime for the Golang version of Gitflow. But doing it now as part of a short-term fix, work on a short-term fix, probably not the greatest. But I just had a thought. We'll just wait for this to finish downloading so my terminal's free. So what's the syntax? We know it's init.defaultBranch. Sorry. Git config. Da, da, da. So it looks like minus minus get. There we go. Right. So did it crash? It returned an error, which is probably the same as anything that's not set. And this is in, once again, this is in version 2.25.1. So that means we can safely redo this and have a fallback. That would work, but I still can't test it at the minute. Right. Let me fire up Visual Studio Code again. How do I compile? Okay, well, we'll worry about that another time. So what I'm looking for now is instructions on how to build this. It's probably in documentation. Let's just go straight to documentation. How to. Lots of docs, lots of docs. How do I build it? Part of me wants to sit here and just read the docs. I know where part of my day tomorrow is going. There's things here that I have not, I definitely want to get up to speed with and read. Come on, give me some instructions on how to compile it. Oh, there's a make file, but that's the make file for the docs. There's a user manual. So that's a Git repository, but right. So that's cool. That's cool, but I want compile instructions. This might actually be easier to read from the browser, weirdly enough. So if I scroll down here to the README, is there any build instructions here? Right then, install. There we go. Cool. So make prefix equals user or This is what I'm after, line 23 onwards. So make configure. Sorry, wrong window. There we go. Okay, we've built that. Ah, there we go. Right. GNU auto config. I haven't done one of these for many years. True story. In the mid-90s, I actually built an alternative to GNU auto config for a project I was working on for 2 years. It had to run on, I think we ended up with 24 different Unix systems. That's actual Unix operating systems, not different versions of stuff. And in order to make C code portable across all of those, we had to do testing of the operating system in a way that I couldn't easily do at the time in GNU auto config. So I had to end up building my own. And if you know where to look on the internet, that code still exists. I've not read it in 20 odd years, so I don't know how well it stands up to scrutiny by any means. That could be a fun, could be fun looking through old code. It was just the facepalm emoji on the screen all the time. Here's code from 20 years ago. What do you think? Good news is the code's compiling, which is good. This machine's getting through it. Just watching the it fly up. So the laptop, the machine that you're seeing on Linux Cam, is a Lenovo T480. It's got Core i7 CPU in, but at the minute I've got it clocked down to mostly because it spends a fair bit of its time untethered, and that gives me maximum battery life. CPU eats battery like no tomorrow on modern laptops. So yeah, I keep it clocked quite down, so just to keep the power draw down. And even though it's plugged into the mains for tonight, it's still throttled down at the minute. I didn't remove the CPU performance setting before I logged in as this user, and this user doesn't have permissions to change that. So it's going to take I wasn't expecting to compile any code. Live and learn. Live and learn. So this is amusing. There's all these, at the minute it's scrolling past all these built-in commands that it's compiling. Be interesting almost to do like a bingo thing and see how many of them you've actually, each of us have used of those in anger. And how many of them we willingly use in anger, and how many of them we use as a command of last resort kind of thing. Right. So we should have, if I'm understanding this correctly, that is our Git 2.28 binary. Let's run it. There we go. Cool. And it's init.default branch, I believe. It's not set. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to double check. No, I did not mean that. Google in its schoolyard popularity approach can be a pain. Right then. So it looks like the variable is not set by default. I was kind of hoping it would actually return a value. I think we can do this. No. Right. So unfortunately, we don't know what the hard-coded value is. Git doesn't tell us via this mechanism. So if I do global, let me just check the syntax. So that should be the syntax. And now if I do a git get, there we go. Right. That's all right. We can work with that. We can work with that. So what we want to do, let's close the Git window down and let's go back to our code. Right, so the first thing we want to do now is we are making a change. So we need to start a new feature branch. And we're going to call this default branch config. That's what we're going to do. Right. So we've now got a new feature branch to working. So if this doesn't work out or we abandon it for some reason, we're not going to affect anyone who's currently needs to download and install the extension. And what we want to do here is we want to, the default suggestion, we want it to come from that config. I'm hesitating, right, so here's the reason I'm hesitating. Let me change cameras. Oh, excuse me, my glasses falling off. The reason I'm hesitating slightly is we're using the default branch to mean the branch that's tracking production. The branch historically known as master. But now that this is configurable, it's perfectly possible for people to say the default branch isn't the equivalent of master. The default branch, for example, could be develop. They could put that legitimately in their git config. And if they did, we could end up in an interesting situation. We could end up with things a bit of a mess. So originally what I was going to do was, well, so originally I was going to make our code ask Git what that default branch should be called. And the documentation is, let's go back to it. I mean, they talk about it here on the GitHub blog, so we'll look at the GitHub blog for a moment. Yeah, it's like the top feature on the GitHub blog for that release. So the idea is this is meant to be the name of your master branch. That's what it's supposed to be, but that doesn't stop people changing that behavior. Are we gonna get people into more trouble? Are we gonna create circumstances where a well-intentioned change ends up creating more failure conditions for users? That's what I'm pondering in my mind at the minute. Because just because it's meant to be used a certain way, we can't control how people use it. We really can't. So it would be something like this. Now, the syntax isn't exactly right. We're going to have to do some work on that. I'm going to do some quick testing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a temporary shell script. So I can run the code and see what happens. Right then. And the other thing we want to do is make sure we're using our gits that we want. Why has that gone purple? Because I've already edited the file, that's why. Okay, so what I want to do is did I not call it that? I did call it that. Bin wrappers. There we go. So I've copied Git locally. And I'm going to edit my shell script to actually run that version of Git. And then I'm going to make it executable. I'm going to run it. So first of all, it didn't crash. Now then, how do we delete a setting with the config? Remove sections. You can get query set replace unset options. So all I want to do is find the unset command. Get set all, get global system local work tree unset. So I want to do git config minus unset init.default branch. So what I'm doing here is I'm testing my change before I've implemented it. So even though I've told Git to unset the change, that didn't work. So did I set it globally? Of course I did. There we go. Right. So now what happens when I run? So what I've done now is I've made sure that we're back to our default state with this setting not in place. So now when I run our test, it says master. So that's good. So that tells me this code change here should work. So what we're going to do, we're going to update this comment. And just to explain what's going on. Right. So that's probably the only code change we need to make based on the code review we've done today. Oh, sorry. Linux cam, you can't see what I'm doing. Ah, sorry. Right, here we go. So what I've been doing is in my terminal, I've been running the shell script. Let me just revise this. So I create a little test script. I do this a lot. In order to test little snippets of code, especially in languages where there's no unit tester or no accepted test harness approach. So it's just a little shell script. It runs our new copy of Git that we've just built, and it tests the syntax that I was writing earlier in VS Code, so I can prove the syntax works without error. And what I did is I made sure that init.default branch had no value, so that when I run the code, that's our default behavior. And if we set it to main, you didn't like that. Why didn't you like that? Oh, what am I? I'm doing something silly again, as always. Get action, get add. There we go. So that now when we run it, we get main as our default. That's all I was doing. But I didn't realize I had the wrong camera on still. So then what I've done is I've gone into our git hf init code. I've expanded the comment to explain what's going on and which version of Git supports it. And we're still going to fall back to master otherwise. And the reason we fall back to master is because it's a historical hard-coded value. So anyone who's using an old Git system, we preserve existing behavior. So that's why we're doing that. So all we need to do now is add this. So git add for command line people, git add -p allows you to do an interactive add where you can pick, P for pick, you can pick the changes that you want to commit. So it allows you to preview what would be part of the git commit. I want that. Now, do I maintain a changelog? Is the next question. I do, but that's Vincent's old one, so not really. That's not very good. Right, so we need a changelog. We don't have a changelog. That's to be fixed another time. So so use git config default branch, sorry, support for git config, git init, git hf init. There we go. That explains what that is. Push that up. Excuse me. So all that's left to do is do a pull request, merge that in and release it, which I'm going to do off camera because this demo user doesn't have permissions to do that at the Git repo. So I need to go and do that off camera on my normal user account. So let me switch back to my slides. And let's review the work plan for tonight. Come on. Sorry, I'm actually clicking on the preview window, not the actual presentation window. There we go, that's better. Right. So I had one moment. There we go, that's better. Right, so we had three topics for tonight. We wanted to, come on. I wanted to understand what GitHub has changed. We've done that. I wanted to understand how it might break the existing Gitflow extension. So we did that first of all by running the code, looking at what happened, being pleasantly surprised by what happened, and then we did a code review to understand why we had good behavior there, and we identified code from Vincent from 11 years ago that had already had a preference for main over master. But that code review also revealed a branch that I don't know how to trigger, I freely admit that, where we could still end up creating a branch called master. And so what we've done there is we've put a fallback in of asking the local install of Git what we should call that branch, what the default branch should be called if we get into that situation where we've got all of our avenues are exhausted. And then the only thing we haven't done tonight is make a new release with the required fixes, because I have to do that on a different account. Can't do that logged into my laptop as my live stream user. So but we've done the code and we've done the required fixes. I just need to go away and do a release, which I can do tonight or most likely tomorrow at some point. So there we go. So that's this week's live stream. A lot less chatty than last week, but that works, especially for something like this where it's very much about getting into the code and fixing it. That works as well. If you're watching this live, and I can see that people have been, thank you very much. Love to see your comments. Love to see you hit that like button. If you're watching this on catch up, please do leave comments on YouTube. I do read the ones that are left. Hello, Oliver. I do read the ones that people leave, and I do try to answer them. So please do leave comments. Let me know what you thought of the live stream. All feedback's helpful. I'm doing this partly for education purposes, to teach you, the viewer, how I go about things as an industry veteran. You, the viewer, will have experiences I don't have. I don't care if you're 6 months out of a boot camp, you're in your first job, you're in your second job, you've been doing it for 4 or 5 years. You'll have experiences I don't have. There could be things that I'm doing where you go, well, hang on a moment, I would do it differently and get a different result. That feedback is just as valid. Don't be afraid to leave that. That's how you deal with an interruption. It happens in the real world. Let's go back to me. Where's my thing gone at the bottom? Oh, we'll worry about that another time. Yeah, it happens in the real world. Don't worry about it. It's something you have to roll with, and it's something you have to adjust schedules for. We don't get to work in an isolated vacuum. We have to, in tech, we work on interconnected systems. We have to be able to roll with that. And that's an example of it tonight. I'm sure there will be more down the road, especially once we start releasing the code and we start the Golang version, and we start getting feedback on how that is doing, for better or for worse. Right. I've been Stuart. Thank you all very much. I never show this slide. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate you watching. And I'll see you next week, where hopefully we can get back on schedule. Have a great week. Stay safe.